In the vibrant world of Edo period Japan, where tradition clashed with human desire, the lives of courtesans in the pleasure quarters unfolded like intricate theater. Beneath the dazzling facade of art, refinement, and commerce lay a hidden reality: pregnancy, an inevitable yet perilous challenge that threatened their livelihoods, reputations, and survival. For these women, navigating unwanted pregnancies demanded not only cunning and resilience, but also a mastery of secretive herbal remedies, spiritual rituals, and even surgical procedures. This is the story of how they confronted this delicate crisis, blending ancient wisdom with desperate ingenuity, all while bound by the rigid hierarchies and social expectations of their time. In the vibrant tapestry of Japan's Edo period, 1603–1868, where samurai swords clinked against wooden floors and merchants' cries filled bustling mock-places, a peculiar social institution flourished in the pleasure quarters that would become both celebrated and controversial throughout history. The world of the Japanese courtesan, or youth, represented far more than mere entertainment. It constituted a complex web of art, commerce, and social stratification that fundamentally shaped urban life across the nation's rapidly growing cities. The pleasure quarters, known as yukaku, stood as meticulously planned districts within major cities like Edo, modern Tokyo, Kaku, Kyoto, and Osaka. These areas weren't simply red light zones, but rather sophisticated entertainment complexes where architecture, garden design, and artistic expression reached their zenith. The most famous of these Yoshiwara in Edo, operated under strict regulations established by the Tokugawa shogunate, which paradoxically sought to control while simultaneously legitimizing this form of entertainment. Within these walled enclaves, a rigid hierarchy emerged among the women who worked there, ranging from the lowly sancha, lowest-ranking prostitutes, to the exalted oiran, the highest-ranking courtesans, whose status rivaled that of aristocrats. To understand the unique position of courtesans in Japanese society, one must first grasp the intricate social structure that governed their lives. Unlike Western perceptions of prostitution, the Japanese system emphasized artistic refinement and cultural sophistication. Courtesans underwent rigorous training in traditional arts, calligraphy, poetry composition, tea ceremony, musical instruments, and classical dance, transforming them into living embodiments of Japanese aesthetic ideals. Their education wasn't merely vocational but rather a comprehensive cultivation of grace, wit, and artistic sensibility that could rival the accomplishments of noble women. The economic significance of the pleasure quarters cannot be overstated. Despite official Confucian rhetoric condemning excessive luxury, these districts became vital centers of commerce, attracting not only wealthy patrons but also artisans, merchants, and entertainers who benefited from the constant flow of money. The wealthiest courtesans commanded astronomical fees for their company, with some oiran reportedly earning enough to purchase entire city blocks. This economic power created a curious inversion of traditional gender roles, as female courtesans wielded significant influence over their male clientele, often dictating fashion trends and social customs. However, beneath this glittering facade lay a foundation of strict regulation and social control. The Tokugawa government implemented detailed codes governing every aspect of life in the pleasure quarters, from the color of courtesan's kimono to the specific rituals of client-courtesan interactions. These regulations served multiple purposes: maintaining public order, generating tax revenue, and ensuring that the pleasure quarters remained distinct spaces separate from mainstream society. The walls surrounding districts like Yoshiwara were physical manifestations of this separation, creating what scholars have termed floating worlds, places where normal social rules were suspended yet strictly controlled through alternative means. Social mobility within the pleasure quarters presented another fascinating dimension to this world. While many entered service through poverty or family obligation, particularly talented courtesans could rise through the ranks based on their skills and popularity. This meritocratic aspect contrasted sharply with the rigid class distinctions characterizing other aspects of Edo period society. Yet even at the highest levels, courtesans remained trapped within the system, their freedom constrained by debt obligations and institutional regulations. The cultural impact of the courtesan system extended far beyond the pleasure quarters themselves. Through their patronage of artists and craftsmen, courtesans helped shape various art forms, including ukiyo-e woodblock prints, kabuki theater, and popular literature. Their distinctive hairstyles, makeup styles, and fashion choices influenced broader trends in Japanese aesthetics. Even today, elements of their artistic legacy persist in modern Japanese culture, though often divorced from their original context. As we delve deeper into the realities of life within these pleasure quarters, it becomes clear that the world of the Japanese courtesan represents a remarkable intersection of art, commerce, and social control. Understanding this complex institution requires looking beyond simplistic moral judgments to appreciate how it reflected and influenced broader aspects of Japanese society during one of its most dynamic historical periods. The courtesan's experience was neither wholly victim nor entirely empowered, but rather an intricate dance between personal agency and institutional constraint that would profoundly shape their responses to the challenges they faced, including the delicate matter of pregnancy. Within the carefully regulated confines of the pleasure quarters, pregnancy presented a crisis that threatened to unravel the delicate balance of social order and economic stability. For courtesans operating at all levels of the hierarchy, the discovery of pregnancy triggered a cascade of consequences that extended far beyond personal distress. The pleasure quarters administrators, known as the nanushi, maintained meticulous records of each woman's activities, health, and menstrual cycles, a bureaucratic obsession born from both economic necessity and social control. Any deviation from expected patterns required immediate attention, as the presence of pregnant courtesans posed logistical, financial, and reputational risks to the entire establishment. At the heart of this issue lay the fundamental tension between the courtesan's role as a commodity and her biological reality as a woman. Pregnancy challenged the carefully constructed image of courtesans as perpetual objects of desire, available for hire without complication or commitment. The physical changes accompanying pregnancy rendered a courtesan temporarily unmarketable, while the subsequent birth and care of a child could permanently remove her from active service. This loss of income, coupled with the costs associated with childbirth and infant care, created significant financial burdens for both individual courtesans and the pleasure quarter as a whole. The social implications proved equally problematic. In a society that valued discretion and maintained strict boundaries between legitimate and illegitimate relationships, the visible evidence of pregnancy threatened to expose the intimate details of client-courtesan interactions. High-ranking courtesans, whose prestige depended heavily on maintaining an aura of refined mystery, found themselves particularly vulnerable to reputation damage should their condition become public knowledge. The potential scandal could extend beyond individual courtesans to tarnish the reputation of entire establishments, potentially leading to regulatory scrutiny from authorities. Furthermore, the hierarchical nature of the pleasure quarters complicated matters significantly. Lower-ranking courtesans faced immediate dismissal upon confirmation of pregnancy, often being cast out with little support or resources. Mid-level courtesans might negotiate temporary leave arrangements or face demotion, while even the most prestigious Orin found themselves walking a precarious tightrope between maintaining their status and addressing their condition. The system's response to pregnancy thus varied dramatically depending on the courtesan's rank, wealth, and connections within the establishment. Perhaps most insidious was the psychological pressure exerted on pregnant courtesans. The pleasure quarters culture emphasized complete devotion to clients and artistic perfection, leaving little room for maternal instincts or personal desires. Many women found themselves torn between societal expectations and natural impulses, caught in a system that offered few acceptable solutions to their situation. The lack of privacy and autonomy within the pleasure quarters only intensified this internal conflict, as decisions about pregnancy were rarely made in isolation but rather involved input from house mothers, administrators, and sometimes even influential clients. Medical considerations added another layer of complexity to the situation. Traditional Japanese medicine viewed pregnancy as a delicate state requiring careful management, but access to proper health care within the pleasure quarters often depended on a courtesan's rank and financial resources. Lower-ranking women frequently received substandard care, while higher-status courtesans enjoyed better treatment facilities but faced greater pressure to maintain appearances throughout their pregnancy. The limited understanding of reproductive health during this period meant that complications could prove particularly dangerous, especially when combined with the stresses of concealment and social stigma. The administrative response to pregnancy cases evolved into a sophisticated system of surveillance and intervention. House mothers conducted regular health checks, while senior courtesans monitored their juniors for signs of irregular behavior or physical changes. Traditional herbal remedies were employed to regulate menstrual cycles and prevent conception, though their effectiveness varied widely. When prevention failed, a network of midwives, doctors, and religious practitioners stood ready to address the situation, though the course of action taken often reflected the courtesan's social standing and financial resources, rather than purely medical considerations. This complex web of challenges facing pregnant courtesans set the stage for the development of increasingly elaborate methods of dealing with unwanted pregnancies. From secretive herbal treatments to elaborate social negotiations, the strategies employed by courtesans and their handlers reveal much about the intersection of personal agency and institutional control within the pleasure quarters. As we examine these responses in detail, it becomes clear that the handling of pregnancy cases represented a microcosm of broader tensions within Japanese society, where tradition clashed with practical necessity and individual needs struggled against collective interests. When prevention failed and pregnancy became inevitable, the courtesans of Japan's pleasure quarters turned to an arsenal of deceptive practices that showcased both their resourcefulness and the systemic pressures they faced. The art of concealment began long before any physical signs appeared. rooted in ancient wisdom passed down through generations of women who understood the delicate balance between survival and secrecy. Traditional Japanese medicine provided the foundation for many of these practices, with herbal remedies forming the first line of defense against detection. Among the most commonly employed herbs was mugwort, yomogi, whose leaves were brewed into potent teas believed to delay the visible signs of pregnancy. Courtesans consumed these bitter infusions regularly, combining them with carefully measured portions of wild ginger and cinnamon bark to mask both the taste and their true purpose. The practice of abdominal binding, using tightly wound silk sashes, complemented these herbal treatments. Skilled courtesans learned to adjust their obi kimono sash in ways that subtly compressed their midsection while maintaining the elegant silhouette expected of their profession. The timing of meals and bathroom visits became an elaborate choreography orchestrated to avoid suspicion. Senior courtesans taught newcomers precise schedules for consuming food and drink, ensuring that their intake aligned perfectly with expected patterns, while secretly managing their nutritional needs. Tea ceremonies and formal dining events provided perfect opportunities to demonstrate their apparent lack of appetite, as refusal could be attributed to artistic refinement rather than medical necessity. Similarly, frequent trips to the communal bathing facilities allowed them to monitor their condition discreetly while maintaining the appearance of fastidious personal hygiene. Cosmetic techniques played a crucial role in maintaining the deception. Specialized makeup formulas, developed through centuries of experimentation, helped disguise the characteristic glow of pregnancy. A mixture of rice powder, pearl dust, and crushed butterfly wings created a matte finish that minimized changes in skin tone, while strategically applied rouge could redirect attention from facial rounding to enhanced cheekbones. The art of hair arrangement evolved to include subtle padding and extensions that balanced changing proportions, ensuring that profile views remained consistent with pre-pregnancy appearances. Movement and posture became carefully calibrated performances. Courtesans trained themselves to walk with precisely measured steps, keeping their backs straight and shoulders relaxed to minimize noticeable changes in gait or stance. The use of folding fans and parasols provided convenient props for subtle adjustments, allowing them to maintain appropriate distances from clients while concealing any developing curves. Even the way they handled musical instruments or performed traditional dances adapted to accommodate their changing bodies without drawing attention. Social engineering formed another critical component of these deceptive practices. Seasoned courtesans cultivated networks of allies within the pleasure quarters, trusted housemaids, sympathetic musicians, and loyal attendants who could help orchestrate alibis and provide cover when necessary. Strategic illnesses, purported allergies, and artistic retreats offered plausible excuses for temporary absences or altered behavior. Some high-ranking courtesans negotiated special accommodations, such as private chambers or secluded gardens, where they could receive select clients without risking exposure. The documentation of these practices reveals a sophisticated understanding of human perception and social dynamics. Detailed manuals, passed secretly between generations of courtesans, outlined precise methods for maintaining the illusion of unchanged beauty. These texts included everything from specific dietary guidelines to recommended conversation topics that could distract from physical changes. Some even contained instructions for simulating menstrual cycles through the use of animal blood and specialized applicators, ensuring that regular proof of non-pregnancy could be produced if demanded by suspicious house mothers or administrators. Perhaps most remarkable was the psychological discipline required to sustain these deceptions over months. Courtesans developed mental exercises to maintain composure during intimate encounters, practicing breathing techniques and visualization methods that help them project confidence and control. The ability to compartmentalize their experiences, to switch between the demanding role of entertainer and the vulnerable state of expectant mother, demonstrated extraordinary emotional resilience, honed through years of professional training. These deceptive practices weren't merely individual survival strategies but rather institutionalized responses to a common challenge. The pleasure quarters themselves tacitly supported these methods, recognizing that successful concealment protected their economic interests and maintained social order. Experienced house mothers provided guidance on timing and technique, while senior courtesans served as mentors in the art of deception. This institutional support created a complex ecosystem of secrecy that extended from individual courtesans to the highest levels of pleasure quarter administration. As these concealment strategies evolved, they revealed deeper truths about the relationship between personal agency and institutional control within the pleasure quarters. While the methods themselves might seem extreme or even cruel by modern standards, they represented logical adaptations to a system that offered few alternatives. The success of these deceptions depended not only on technical skill, but also on the collective will of an entire community of women determined to navigate the challenges of pregnancy within the constraints imposed upon them. These practices laid the groundwork for more drastic measures that would emerge when concealment alone proved insufficient to address the complexities of unwanted pregnancy. Beneath the polished veneer of the pleasure quarters existed a parallel world of medicinal expertise, where generations of female practitioners preserved and refined a vast pharmacopoeia of plant-based remedies specifically targeting reproductive health. These herbal specialists, often working in quiet consultation rooms tucked away in the corners of pleasure district compounds, represented a crucial bridge between traditional Japanese medicine and the practical needs of courtesans facing unintended pregnancies. Their knowledge spanned centuries of accumulated wisdom, incorporating elements from Chinese medicinal theory, indigenous Shinto practices, and Buddhist healing traditions into a uniquely Japanese approach to women's health. At the core of their practice stood several key botanicals that formed the foundation of both preventative measures and termination attempts. Mugwort, Artemisia princeps, already valued for its concealment properties, took on new significance when prepared in concentrated doses. Master herbalists employed a sophisticated extraction process involving prolonged steaming and fermentation to create powerful tinctures that could induce uterine contractions when necessary. Similarly, the root of the peony plant Paeonia lactiflora, traditionally used to regulate menstruation, found application in carefully calibrated formulations designed to restore regular cycles or terminate early-stage pregnancies. The preparation and administration of these remedies followed precise protocols that reflected both medical knowledge and spiritual considerations. Each treatment began with purification rituals, as practitioners believed that the effectiveness of herbal medicine depended heavily on the practitioner's spiritual state. Freshly harvested ingredients underwent elaborate processing methods, often synchronized with lunar cycles and seasonal transitions, following the belief that plants contained different potencies at various times of year. This attention to timing extended to dosage schedules, with treatments coordinated according to traditional Japanese timekeeping systems that divided days into 6-hour segments. Among the most potent remedies were those derived from the safflower plant Carthamus tinctorius, whose bright red flowers symbolized both vitality and danger. Safflower-based preparations required particular caution, as their effects could range from mild menstrual regulation to severe uterine stimulation depending on concentration and combination with other herbs. Expert herbalists developed sophisticated delivery methods, including vaginal suppositories and specialized tea blends, that maximized efficacy while minimizing risk to the patient. These applications drew upon advanced understanding of human anatomy and physiology, incorporating techniques that modern medicine would later recognize as remarkably sophisticated. The role of temperature regulation in herbal therapy proved particularly innovative. Traditional practitioners recognized the importance of body heat in reproductive health, developing complex systems for applying heat or cold to specific points along the meridian pathways believed to influence uterine function. Stone beds warmed by underground heating systems, combined with herbal compresses infused with warming agents like ginger and cinnamon, formed part of comprehensive treatment protocols. Conversely, cooling therapies utilizing mint extracts and chilled stone pillows addressed complications arising from excessive heat in the reproductive system. Documentation of these practices survived in detailed herbals and treatment manuals maintained by successive generations of practitioners. These texts, often written in specialized medical terminology and accompanied by intricate illustrations, cataloged hundreds of plant species and their applications. They included precise instructions for harvesting, preparing, and administering remedies, along with warnings about potential side effects and contraindications. Some manuscripts even contained coded language and symbolic representations designed to protect sensitive knowledge from casual readers, while preserving it for initiated practitioners. The institutional support for these herbal practices manifested in dedicated medical facilities within the larger pleasure quarters. These clinics, staffed by both male physicians and female herbal specialists, maintained extensive herb gardens and storage facilities. They operated under strict confidentiality agreements, with records kept in cipher and patients identified only by numerical codes. The integration of Western medical knowledge during the later Edo period introduced new elements to traditional practices, though many courtesans preferred the familiar comfort of native remedies despite emerging alternatives. Patient-practitioner relationships developed into sophisticated therapeutic alliances characterized by mutual trust and shared responsibility. Successful outcomes depended heavily on accurate diagnosis and careful monitoring of treatment progress. Practitioners maintained detailed case notes, tracking symptoms, responses to treatment, and eventual outcomes. This systematic approach to patient care contributed to the gradual refinement of treatment protocols and the development of more effective remedies over time. The ethical dimensions of these practices remained complex and often contradictory. While contemporary perspectives might view certain applications as morally questionable, within their historical context, these herbal treatments represented legitimate medical interventions sanctioned by both tradition and necessity. Practitioners approached their work with solemn dedication, viewing themselves as guardians of women's health rather than mere purveyors of abortifacient remedies. Their careful balancing of potential risks and benefits, combined with deep respect for the sanctity of life, reflected a sophisticated understanding of medical ethics that transcended simple moral dichotomies. These herbal practices didn't exist in isolation, but rather formed part of a broader continuum of reproductive health care within the pleasure quarters. They complemented other methods of managing pregnancy while providing courtesans with options that aligned with traditional beliefs and cultural values. The persistence of these practices through centuries of social change speaks to their effectiveness and the trust placed in them by generations of women navigating the challenges of unwanted pregnancy within the unique constraints of their environment. Beyond the realm of herbal remedies and physical concealment, Japanese courtesans turned to an intricate web of spiritual practices and divine petitions that reflected both their desperation and deeply ingrained cultural beliefs. These spiritual interventions operated on multiple planes, invoking protection from compassionate deities, seeking intervention from wrathful spirits, and channeling mystical forces through elaborate rituals that merged Shinto, Buddhist, and folk traditions into a unique syncretic framework specifically adapted to address the challenges of unwanted pregnancy. Central to these practices stood the veneration of Kannon, the bodhisattva of compassion, whose multifaceted manifestations provided diverse avenues for petition. Courtesans particularly favored the manifestation known as Uikimen Kannon, 11-faced Kannon, believed to possess special powers over women's reproductive health. Secret shrines dedicated to this deity existed within the pleasure quarters, their locations known only to trusted spiritual practitioners and senior courtesans. Here, women performed midnight prayers while burning bundles of mugwort and reciting specific sutras believed to invoke divine intervention. The smoke from these sacred fires carried their petitions heavenward, while the rhythmic chanting created a meditative state conducive to spiritual connection. The invocation of protective spirits, kami, from local Shinto traditions proved equally important. Courtesans maintained small household altars dedicated to Inari, the fox deity associated with fertility and prosperity, paradoxically petitioning this kami both for protection against pregnancy and assistance in terminating existing conditions. These altars featured miniature torii gates, fox statues holding sacred scrolls in their mouths, and offerings of Abura age fried tofu, arranged in precise geometric patterns believed to enhance their spiritual potency. Regular offerings of rice wine and seasonal fruits maintained the favor of these spirits, while special purification rites cleansed negative energies associated with reproductive issues. Perhaps most intriguing were the specialized rituals performed at twilight, when the boundary between worlds thinned according to traditional belief. These ceremonies, led by experienced Miko shrine maidens who worked discreetly within the pleasure quarters, combined elements of exorcism and blessing. Participants wore white robes adorned with protective symbols painted in cinnabar ink, while priests chanted ancient mantras accompanied by the rhythmic beating of sacred drums. The ritual space transformed through the strategic placement of salt barriers and paper talismans of Fuda bearing mystical characters, creating a purified zone where divine intervention could manifest. Certain Buddhist sects, particularly those emphasizing esoteric practices, offered specialized rites for addressing reproductive concerns. The Shingon school, with its emphasis on mantra recitation and mudra formation, proved particularly influential. Courtesans learned specific hand gestures and vocalizations believed to activate protective energies within their bodies. These practices required intense concentration and precise execution, often practiced in secret meditation chambers hidden within the pleasure quarter compounds. Advanced practitioners claimed mastery over internal energy flows, using visualized light channels to direct spiritual force toward their reproductive organs. Folk magic traditions supplemented these formal religious practices with more pragmatic approaches. Courtesans collected and preserved various amulets believed to prevent or terminate pregnancy, including dried snake skins, owl feathers, and specially blessed cords tied in complex knots. These items often came with specific instructions for activation, such as carrying them during particular moon phases or exposing them to specific natural phenomena. The creation of these charms involved elaborate ceremonies conducted at crossroads or other liminal spaces considered particularly potent for magical workings. Divination played a crucial role in determining the appropriate course of spiritual action. Experienced fortune tellers employed various methods, from examining cracks in heated turtle shells to interpreting patterns in scattered rice grains, to identify the most auspicious times for interventions and predict their likely success. These readings guided both the selection of specific deities to petition and the formulation of appropriate ritual responses. Certain days of the traditional Japanese calendar, particularly those marked by specific combinations of celestial influences, were considered especially favorable for addressing reproductive issues. The integration of spiritual practices with daily life manifested in subtle yet pervasive ways. Courtesans incorporated protective gestures into their regular movements, touching specific points on their bodies while reciting silent prayers during client interactions. They arranged their sleeping quarters according to geomantic principles, positioning protective amulets and spirit tablets in precise locations believed to enhance their effectiveness. Even their choice of clothing colors and patterns reflected underlying spiritual concerns, with certain combinations serving as wearable talismans against unwanted pregnancy. Seasonal festivals provided additional opportunities for spiritual intervention. During Setsubun, the festival marking the beginning of spring, courtesans participated in bean-throwing ceremonies intended to drive away evil spirits affecting reproductive health. The Summer Bone Festival saw elaborate offerings to ancestral spirits, with special prayers for guidance in addressing pregnancy-related challenges. These public rituals masked deeper, more personal intentions through their outward celebration of traditional customs, allowing courtesans to pursue their spiritual goals while maintaining social propriety. The documentation of these spiritual practices reveals a sophisticated understanding of psychological and physiological factors influencing reproductive health. Many rituals incorporated elements designed to reduce stress and promote relaxation, recognizing the impact of emotional state on physical well-being. Breathing exercises, visualization techniques, and meditative postures helped participants achieve states of calm that facilitated both spiritual connection and physiological change. This holistic approach acknowledged the complex interplay between mind, body, and spirit in addressing reproductive concerns. While the effectiveness of these spiritual interventions remains difficult to quantify by modern standards, their persistence through centuries suggests their perceived value among those who practiced them. Contemporary accounts describe numerous instances where courtesans credited divine intervention with resolving their pregnancy challenges, whether through spontaneous termination or successful concealment until term. These testimonies reinforced belief in the power of spiritual practices and encouraged their continued transmission across generations of women navigating similar circumstances within the pleasure quarters. When spiritual petitions and herbal remedies proved insufficient, Japanese courtesans turned to increasingly invasive medical procedures that pushed the boundaries of contemporary medical knowledge and surgical capability. These interventions, performed by specialized practitioners known as shadow physicians, represented the culmination of centuries of medical innovation and desperate necessity. Operating in carefully concealed clinics within the pleasure quarters, these medical experts developed sophisticated techniques for terminating advanced pregnancies and addressing complications that arose from both wanted and unwanted conceptions. The most common surgical procedure involved a method known as thread extraction, where specially treated silk threads were inserted through the cervix to induce uterine contractions and facilitate expulsion. This technique required exceptional precision and anatomical knowledge, as practitioners had to navigate the complex internal structures without causing fatal hemorrhages or infections. The threads themselves underwent elaborate preparation, coated with herbal compounds that combined anti-inflammatory properties with uterine-stimulating effects. Senior physicians maintained detailed records of thread lengths, insertion depths, and treatment durations, refining their methods through careful observation and documentation. More advanced cases necessitated direct surgical intervention through abdominal procedures that contemporary Western medicine would later recognize as precursors to modern caesarean techniques. These operations, performed under carefully controlled conditions, utilized specialized surgical instruments crafted from high-grade steel and sterilized through traditional methods involving boiling water and herbal steam baths. Practitioners developed innovative techniques for managing pain and preventing infection, including localized acupuncture to numb targeted areas and the application of antibiotic pastes made from fermented plant extracts. The survival rates for these procedures, while still concerning by modern standards, represented remarkable achievements given the technological limitations of the period. The treatment of complications arising from both surgical interventions and natural childbirth evolved into a sophisticated field of emergency medicine. Hemorrhage control techniques, for instance, incorporated pressure point manipulation, herbal clotting agents, and specialized bandaging methods that combined traditional wrapping techniques with modern innovations in textile technology. Physicians maintained emergency kits containing carefully prepared medications, surgical tools, and diagnostic instruments, ready to respond to crises at any hour. The development of these emergency protocols reflected deep understanding of both acute and chronic medical conditions affecting reproductive health. Diagnostic methods accompanying these surgical procedures demonstrated advanced medical knowledge. Practitioners employed sophisticated examination techniques, including vaginal palpation, urine analysis, and pulse diagnosis, to determine the precise stage of pregnancy and assess potential complications. Specialized instruments, such as graduated dilators and calibrated speculums, allowed for precise measurement and monitoring of internal conditions. These diagnostic capabilities enabled physicians to tailor their interventions to individual cases, improving both safety and effectiveness of treatment outcomes. Post-operative care represented another crucial aspect of medical intervention, with practitioners developing comprehensive recovery protocols that integrated traditional medicine with innovative approaches to wound healing and infection prevention. Patients recuperated in specially designed recovery rooms featuring climate-controlled environments, antibacterial bedding materials, and carefully regulated dietary regimens. Herbal baths, steam treatments, and massage therapy complemented Western-style wound care, creating a hybrid approach that maximized healing potential while respecting cultural preferences and sensitivities. The institutionalization of these medical practices manifested in dedicated surgical facilities staffed by teams of specialized practitioners. These clinics maintained strict confidentiality policies, with patients identified only by code names and treatment records encrypted using specialized medical terminology. The facilities themselves incorporated advanced architectural features, including soundproof walls, hidden entrances, and secure storage for medical equipment and documentation. Administrative staff managed scheduling, record keeping, and follow-up care, ensuring smooth operation while maintaining the necessary level of discretion. Training programs for surgical practitioners evolved into sophisticated apprenticeship systems that combined theoretical instruction with hands-on experience. Novice physicians observed hundreds of procedures before attempting their own, progressing through graded levels of responsibility as they demonstrated competence and reliability. Specialized textbooks and illustrated manuals documented surgical techniques, anatomical knowledge, and emergency protocols, creating a standardized body of medical knowledge that could be transmitted across generations. Regular peer review sessions and case conferences ensured continuous improvement in surgical methods and patient outcomes. The ethical dimensions of these medical interventions remained complex and often contentious. While contemporary perspectives might question the morality of certain procedures, within their historical context, these interventions represented legitimate medical practices, sanctioned by both necessity and tradition. Practitioners approached their work with solemn dedication, viewing themselves as skilled professionals committed to preserving life, rather than merely performing technical operation. Their careful balancing of potential risks and benefits, combined with deep respect for their patients' dignity and autonomy, reflected a sophisticated understanding of medical ethics that transcended simple moral dichotomies. Documentation of these medical practices reveals a remarkable level of scientific sophistication and clinical insight. Detailed case studies, surgical logs, and outcome analyses demonstrate systematic approaches to quality improvement and risk management. Practitioners maintained meticulous records of complications, treatment modifications, and innovative techniques, contributing to the gradual refinement of surgical protocols and the development of more effective interventions over time. This commitment to evidence-based practice and continuous learning stands as testament to the professionalism and dedication of these medical specialists, operating within the challenging environment of the pleasure quarters. The integration of these medical interventions with other approaches to managing pregnancy challenges created a comprehensive system of reproductive health care that addressed the full spectrum of possibilities facing courtesans. From early-stage prevention through advanced surgical procedures and post-operative recovery, these medical practices formed a crucial pillar supporting the complex infrastructure that enabled women to navigate the difficulties of unwanted pregnancy within the unique constraints of their environment. Their persistence through centuries of social change speaks to their effectiveness and the trust placed in them by generations of women seeking solutions to their reproductive challenges within the pleasure quarters. Behind the carefully maintained facades of concealment and the sophisticated medical interventions lay a profound human cost that no amount of institutional support or professional expertise could fully mitigate. The cumulative impact of repeated pregnancy terminations, sustained deception, and constant vigilance exacted a devastating toll on courtesans' physical and emotional well-being, revealing the harsh reality beneath the polished surface of pleasure quarter life. Medical records and personal testimonies, carefully preserved in coded journals and oral histories, paint a harrowing picture of the long-term consequences faced by women who repeatedly navigated the treacherous waters of unwanted pregnancy within this unforgiving system. Physically, the repeated trauma of surgical interventions and herbal treatments left permanent scars that extended far beyond visible marks. Chronic pelvic pain became an almost universal companion for veteran courtesans, with many developing conditions that modern medicine would diagnose as endometriosis, uterine fibroids, or chronic inflammation of reproductive tissues. The delicate balance of hormones governing menstrual cycles frequently became disrupted, leading to irregular bleeding patterns, severe cramping, and in some cases, complete cessation of menstruation. These hormonal imbalances often manifested in secondary symptoms, including debilitating migraines, bone density loss, and premature aging that robbed women of their youthful appearance far earlier than their chronological age would suggest. Psychological burden proved equally crushing, though less visible to outside observers. Constant fear of discovery, coupled with the necessity of maintaining elaborate deceptions, fostered a state of chronic anxiety that never truly dissipated. Many courtesans developed what contemporary psychology would recognize as complex post-traumatic stress disorder, characterized by hypervigilance, dissociative episodes, and intrusive memories of particularly traumatic experiences. Sleep disturbances became endemic, with women reporting vivid nightmares and insomnia that resisted even the most potent sedatives available at the time. The need to compartmentalize their experiences, to switch seamlessly between their professional personas and their private struggles, led to profound identity fragmentation that sometimes persisted even after leaving the pleasure quarters. Reproductive health specialists documented alarming patterns of progressive damage among women who underwent multiple interventions. Scarring of uterine tissue from repeated procedures often resulted in Asherman syndrome, a condition that not only prevented future pregnancies but also caused severe menstrual complications. Chronic infections, resistant to even the most advanced herbal antibiotics of the time, spread through compromised immune systems weakened by repeated stress and invasive procedures. Some women developed fistulas or other structural abnormalities that caused lifelong urinary and bowel dysfunction, conditions that carried significant social stigma even within the relatively tolerant environment of the pleasure quarters. The emotional toll extended beyond individual suffering to affect interpersonal relationships and social dynamics within the pleasure quarters. Trust became a rare commodity as women navigated complex webs of alliances and rivalries, knowing that a single betrayal could lead to catastrophic consequences. Friendships often carried undertones of calculation, with women weighing the risks of confiding in others against the potential benefits of mutual support. This atmosphere of guarded intimacy fostered profound loneliness, with many courtesans reporting feelings of profound isolation despite being surrounded by people constantly. The inability to share their deepest fears and traumas openly created emotional pressure cookers that sometimes erupted in unexpected ways. Physical rehabilitation from surgical procedures required extensive time and resources, often pushing women deeper into debt or forcing them to accept lower-paying clients while recovering. The traditional 40-day confinement period prescribed after major interventions proved particularly challenging for women whose livelihood depended on constant availability. Many attempted to return to work prematurely, exacerbating their physical recovery and increasing the risk of complications. Those who managed to complete the full recovery period often found themselves struggling to regain their former status and earning potential, as clients tended to prefer newer, seemingly healthier courtesans. The cumulative effect of these physical and emotional burdens often manifested in self-destructive behaviors. Increased substance abuse, particularly of opium and alcohol, became common coping mechanisms despite their obvious dangers. Some women developed eating disorders as they attempted to maintain control over at least one aspect of their bodies. Self-harm, though officially denied and carefully concealed, left telltale marks that experienced practitioners recognized as warning signs of deeper psychological distress. The incidence of suicide attempts, while carefully covered up by pleasure quarter administrators, appears to have been alarmingly high among courtesans who found themselves trapped in cycles of repeated interventions and mounting debts. Veteran courtesans, having witnessed countless colleagues succumb to these cumulative stresses, developed sophisticated systems of mutual support that operated beneath official notice. Secret sisterhoods formed, providing emotional sanctuary and practical assistance to members facing particularly challenging situations. These informal networks shared resources, coordinated recovery periods, and maintained emergency funds to help women through particularly difficult times. However, even these supportive relationships carried risks, as the discovery of organized mutual aid could lead to severe punishment from pleasure quarter administrators concerned about maintaining control over their workforce. Medical practitioners themselves bore witness to the human cost of these interventions, documenting in their private records the progression of damage they observed in repeat patients. Some developed elaborate scoring systems to track the cumulative impact of multiple procedures, using these metrics to counsel women about their risks and options. Others maintained confidential files detailing the long-term outcomes of different treatment approaches, though these records often disappeared when practitioners retired or passed away, taking their hard-won knowledge with them. The ethical dilemma of continuing to perform procedures on women whose bodies showed clear signs of approaching collapse weighed heavily on many practitioners, leading some to specialize in palliative care or transition to other fields of medicine entirely. The institutional response to these human costs reflected the complex priorities of pleasure quarter administration. While officially promoting the health and well-being of their workers, administrators often prioritized short-term economic considerations over long-term sustainability. Recovery periods were routinely shortened, risky procedures approved under financial pressure, and preventive care neglected in favor of more immediately profitable activities. This institutional complicity in the deterioration of courtesans' health created additional layers of resentment and mistrust, further complicating the already challenging task of maintaining physical and emotional well-being within the pleasure quarter system. As generations of courtesans navigated these challenges, patterns emerged that revealed both the resilience and vulnerability of women operating within this system. Some managed to build successful careers spanning decades, developing remarkable coping mechanisms and accumulating sufficient resources to eventually retire comfortably. Others burned out quickly, their bodies and spirits broken by the relentless demands placed upon them. The spectrum of experiences reflected not only individual differences in physical constitution and emotional resilience, but also the complex interplay of social, economic, and institutional factors that shaped every aspect of life within the pleasure quarters. Within the meticulously ordered hierarchy of the pleasure quarters, the handling of pregnancy cases revealed intricate power dynamics that transcended simple administrative control, creating a complex web of dependencies, protections, and exploitations that fundamentally shaped courtesans' experiences. The social structure of these establishments, far from being monolithic, operated through a sophisticated system of checks and balances that distributed authority across multiple stakeholders, each pursuing their own interests while maintaining the overall functionality of the institution. At the apex of this hierarchy stood the nanoshi, or pleasure quarter administrators, who wielded ultimate authority over operational decisions. These officials, appointed by the Tokugawa shogunate, maintained strict oversight of all activities within their jurisdiction, including the management of pregnancy cases. Their primary concerns centered on maintaining social order and maximizing revenue generation, often leading to decisions that prioritized institutional stability over individual welfare. Nanoshi maintained detailed records of each courtesan's status, health, and financial obligations, using this information to calculate the potential impact of pregnancy on both individual careers and overall profitability. Their decisions regarding treatment options, recovery periods, and career trajectories carried significant weight, though they typically consulted with medical practitioners and senior courtesans before implementing major interventions. House mothers, known as okasan, occupied a crucial intermediate position in this power structure, serving as both enforcers of institutional policy and advocates for their charges. These experienced women, often former courtesans themselves, managed specific houses or sections within the pleasure quarters, maintaining direct oversight of their residents' daily activities. Their role in pregnancy management proved particularly complex, as they balanced their duty to protect institutional interests with genuine concern for their charges' well-being. Okasan maintained close relationships with medical practitioners, spiritual advisors, and administrative officials, leveraging these connections to negotiate favorable outcomes for their girls while ensuring compliance with official regulations. Their influence extended beyond immediate practical matters to include shaping the cultural norms and behavioral expectations surrounding pregnancy within their domains. Senior courtesans, particularly those holding Oran status, commanded significant social capital that could be leveraged in pregnancy situations. Their elevated position within the hierarchy granted them access to premium medical care, extended recovery periods, and greater discretion in managing their condition. More importantly, their influence extended to protecting junior courtesans, as they often intervened on behalf of younger women facing particularly challenging circumstances. This mentorship system created vertical bonds of loyalty that sometimes superseded official administrative hierarchies, allowing for more nuanced responses to pregnancy cases than institutional policy might otherwise permit. The most successful Oran developed extensive networks of influence that included medical practitioners, religious figures, and even influential clients, giving them remarkable latitude in navigating pregnancy-related challenges. Medical practitioners themselves occupied a complex position within this power structure, wielding significant authority through their specialized knowledge while remaining subject to institutional oversight. Senior physicians, particularly those specializing in women's health, enjoyed considerable autonomy in making treatment decisions, though they typically coordinated closely with house mothers and administrators. Their recommendations carried substantial weight in determining appropriate courses of action, and their assessments often served as official justifications for administrative decisions. The emergence of specialized clinics within the pleasure quarters, staffed by teams of medical professionals, created new centers of power that sometimes challenged traditional administrative authority, particularly in cases requiring advanced surgical intervention. Clients, though ostensibly external to the pleasure quarter's internal hierarchy, exerted surprising influence over pregnancy management through their economic power and social connections. Wealthy patrons could demand special consideration for favored courtesans, sometimes arranging for private medical care or negotiating extended leave periods. In cases where paternity was suspected or acknowledged, influential clients might intervene directly, using their political connections to secure favorable outcomes for their favored courtesans. This dynamic created an additional layer of complexity, as administrators had to balance the demands of powerful patrons against institutional policies and financial considerations. The potential for scandal, should a client's involvement become public knowledge, forced administrators to tread carefully when addressing these situations, often leading to discreet negotiations and carefully orchestrated solutions that maintained appearances while satisfying influential stakeholders, lower-ranking courtesans and attendants. Despite their subordinate positions, wielded subtle forms of influence through their collective actions and informal networks. These women, who formed the backbone of daily operations within the pleasure quarters, possessed intimate knowledge of their environment and developed sophisticated systems of mutual support. Through careful coordination, they could influence the flow of information, control access to resources, and create spaces of relative safety within the rigid hierarchy. Their ability to delay reports of pregnancy, facilitate access to alternative treatments, or provide temporary sanctuary demonstrated how even those at the bottom of the social ladder could exercise agency within the system's constraints. Religious figures and spiritual practitioners occupied a unique position that transcended traditional power structures, serving as intermediaries between different levels of the hierarchy. Their authority derived from both official sanction and cultural reverence, allowing them to navigate complex situations with relative autonomy. Senior monks, shrine maidens, and esoteric practitioners maintained relationships with all levels of the pleasure quarter's social structure, from administrators to junior courtesans. This positioning enabled them to mediate conflicts, negotiate compromises, and provide guidance on sensitive matters without directly challenging existing power dynamics. Their recommendations, particularly regarding spiritual interventions and timing of procedures, carried significant weight and often influenced final decisions. The intersection of these various power centers created a dynamic environment where authority was constantly negotiated and renegotiated. Official policies established by administrators provided a framework for action, but the actual implementation often depended on the complex interplay between house mothers, senior courtesans, medical practitioners, and other stakeholders. This flexible approach allowed the system to respond to individual circumstances while maintaining overall stability, though it sometimes led to inconsistent treatment and potential exploitation of vulnerable individuals. Financial considerations served as a unifying force that bound these various power structures together. Every decision regarding pregnancy management ultimately returned to economic calculations: the cost of medical intervention, lost revenue during recovery periods, potential compensation from involved clients, and long-term impact on earning potential. Administrators maintained detailed accounting records that tracked these factors, using them to justify decisions that might otherwise appear arbitrary or harsh. The economic imperative created strange alliances and unexpected accommodations, as different stakeholders found common ground in protecting institutional profitability while managing individual cases. This complex web of power dynamics also influenced the development and implementation of preventive measures. Administrators worked closely with medical practitioners to establish protocols for monitoring courtesans' health and menstrual cycles, while house mothers enforced these regulations through daily supervision. Senior courtesans contributed their experience and wisdom to refine these preventive strategies, creating a multi-layered approach to risk management that reflected input from all levels of the hierarchy. The effectiveness of these measures depended heavily on the cooperation of lower-ranking courtesans and attendants, who served as the front line in detecting potential issues and implementing daily routines designed to minimize risks. The handling of exceptional cases, those involving high-profile courtesans, influential clients, or unusual complications, revealed the true nature of these power dynamics. In such situations, the formal hierarchy often gave way to more fluid arrangements as different stakeholders mobilized their resources and influence to achieve favorable outcomes. These exceptional cases sometimes resulted in precedents that subtly shifted the balance of power within the institution, creating new opportunities for negotiation and accommodation while reinforcing the fundamental structures that maintained order within the pleasure quarters. As this intricate system evolved over time, it developed mechanisms for addressing changing circumstances and emerging challenges. The introduction of Western medical knowledge during the later Edo period, for instance, required adjustments in power relationships as traditional practitioners adapted to new methodologies and administrators incorporated foreign expertise into existing frameworks. Similarly, shifting social attitudes and economic conditions necessitated recalibrations of authority and responsibility, demonstrating the remarkable adaptability of this complex social structure in managing the persistent challenge of pregnancy within the pleasure quarters. The pervasive presence of pregnancy-related challenges within the pleasure quarters inevitably permeated Japanese artistic expression, manifesting in subtle yet profound ways across various art forms. The ukiyo-e woodblock prints, those vibrant snapshots of floating world life, frequently encoded complex narratives about reproductive health and its management through sophisticated visual metaphors. Artists like Utamaro and Hokusai, themselves intimately familiar with the pleasure quarters, developed elaborate iconographic systems that convey deeper truths about the courtesan's experience, while maintaining the necessary veil of discretion required by censorship laws. In ukiyo-e, the depiction of courtesans often included carefully placed symbolic elements that hinted at their reproductive status or concerns. The arrangement of folding screens by obu in background compositions followed precise patterns indicating whether a subject faced fertility challenges or had successfully concealed her condition. Specific combinations of seasonal flowers, particularly plum blossoms, chrysanthemums, and peonies, communicated nuanced messages about menstrual cycles and pregnancy status through their traditional associations with female health and vitality. Even the direction of water flow in depicted landscapes carried coded meanings related to reproductive concerns, with upstream movement suggesting prevention efforts and downstream patterns indicating termination procedures. Kabuki theater, with its elaborate performances and stylized conventions, developed entire subgenres devoted to obliquely addressing pregnancy themes. Certain dramatic poses, and specific hand gestures, kata, evolved into standardized codes, understood by initiated audiences, allowing actors to convey complex narratives about reproductive health without violating censorship restrictions. The use of particular musical motifs and drum patterns during scenes set in pleasure quarters signaled underlying pregnancy-related tensions, while specific costume details, particularly the arrangement of obi sashes and the placement of decorative cords, communicated precise information about characters' reproductive status to knowledgeable viewers. Literature produced within and about the pleasure quarters employed rich metaphorical language to explore these themes. Renowned works like Ukiyo Monogatari, Tales of the Floating World, and various Nikki Bungaku, diary literature pieces crafted elaborate allegories using weather patterns, lunar phases, and seasonal changes to describe the progression of pregnancy and the success or failure of concealment attempts. Poetic forms like haikai and renga incorporated specialized vocabulary related to herbal medicine and spiritual practices, creating dense layers of meaning, accessible only to readers familiar with the coded language of reproductive health management. Visual arts extended beyond ukiyo-e to include more private forms of expression, such as emaki, illustrated hand scrolls, and personal sketchbooks maintained by courtesans themselves. These intimate artworks documented daily rituals of menstrual tracking, herbal preparation, and spiritual practice through delicate ink drawings and calligraphic notations. Some collections featured elaborate diagrams of pressure points and meridian lines related to reproductive health, blending traditional medical knowledge with artistic expression in ways that preserved crucial information while circumventing official scrutiny. Craft arts associated with the pleasure quarters likewise incorporated subtle references to reproductive themes. Lacquerware designs, kimono patterns, and hair ornament arrangements featured specific combinations of motifs that conveyed information about users' reproductive status. The positioning of particular animals, plant, or celestial bodies within these decorative schemes followed established conventions understood by courtesans and their associates, creating a sophisticated visual language that operated beneath the surface of apparent ornamentation. Music and dance performances within the pleasure quarters evolved specialized sequences and movements that addressed reproductive concerns through abstract representation. Traditional instruments like the shamisen and koto were played with particular techniques that mimic the rhythms of uterine contractions or the flow of herbal infusions, while dance choreography incorporated subtle pelvic movements and breathing patterns that aligned with therapeutic exercises recommended for reproductive health management. These artistic expressions served both practical purposes, maintaining muscle tone and promoting circulation, and symbolic functions, communicating experiences too sensitive for direct discussion. The temporal aspects of artistic expression proved particularly significant in encoding information about reproductive cycles and treatment protocols. Time-based arts like tea ceremony and incense appreciation developed specific sequences and durations that corresponded to menstrual cycles, treatment schedules, and recovery periods. The careful measurement of intervals between ritual actions, the duration of particular compositions, and the timing of performance elements all contributed to a comprehensive system of temporal coding that helped courtesans track and manage their reproductive health within the constraints of institutional surveillance. These artistic manifestations of pregnancy-related challenges demonstrate the remarkable creativity with which courtesans and their allies navigated the complex landscape of reproductive health management. Through sophisticated systems of metaphor, symbolism, and coded communication, they transformed potentially dangerous knowledge into culturally sanctioned forms of artistic expression. This transformation not only preserved crucial information but also elevated the management of reproductive health to the realm of high art, reflecting the deep integration of these concerns into the broader cultural fabric of Japan's pleasure quarters. The Tokugawa shogunate's approach to regulating pregnancy within the pleasure quarters represented a masterclass in bureaucratic sophistication, combining strict legal frameworks with pragmatic flexibility to maintain social order, while accommodating economic realities. Central to this regulatory apparatus stood the Yoshiwara Nanushi Rei, a comprehensive code governing every aspect of pleasure quarter operations, including detailed provisions for managing pregnancy cases. This legal framework evolved through centuries of refinement, incorporating lessons learned from countless situations while adapting to changing social attitudes and medical advancements. At its core, The regulatory system established clear protocols for reporting and documenting pregnancy cases. House mothers maintained meticulous records known as harem-echo, or belly measurement books, tracking each courtesan's menstrual cycles, physical examinations, and any observed irregularities. These documents, written in specialized medical terminology and encrypted with numerical codes, provided legal documentation while maintaining necessary discretion. The frequency and precision of these records increased with a courtesan's rank, reflecting both higher stakes and greater resources available for monitoring elite performers. Legal statutes distinguished between different categories of pregnancy cases, each triggering specific administrative responses. Unplanned pregnancies among lower-ranking courtesans typically resulted in immediate dismissal and transfer to designated care facilities outside the pleasure quarters, following procedures outlined in the Gotanyama regulations. Mid-level courtesans faced demotion or temporary reassignment to less visible roles, with their cases handled according to the Nakanocho protocols that balanced punishment with rehabilitation potential. High-ranking Oran received special consideration under the Koshin Machi dispensations, allowing for extended leave periods and access to premium medical care while maintaining their status and earning potential. The legal framework incorporated sophisticated mechanisms for dispute resolution and liability assignment. When paternity disputes arose, administrators applied the Yotsuya verification process, requiring detailed testimonies, medical examinations, and sometimes even judicial arbitration. This system protected institutional interests while providing structured pathways for resolving conflicts between clients, courtesans, and administrators. Special courts within the pleasure quarters, staffed by officials trained in both legal procedure and medical knowledge, handled these cases using precedent-based decision-making that ensured consistency while allowing for contextual adaptation. Economic considerations fundamentally shaped regulatory approaches, with legal provisions carefully calibrated to balance institutional profitability against individual welfare. The Shimbashi compensation codes established standardized formulas for calculating financial responsibilities, taking into account factors such as a courtesan's rank, length of service, and projected earning potential. These calculations determined appropriate treatment options, recovery periods, and future career trajectory, ensuring that institutional decisions aligned with long-term economic sustainability while maintaining the appearance of fairness and concern for individual well-being. Administrative responses to pregnancy cases demonstrated remarkable flexibility within the rigid legal framework. Seasonal adjustments to enforcement policies, known as the Ruke Maikon modifications, accounted for variations in business cycles and client demand patterns. During peak seasons, stricter enforcement ensured maximum workforce availability, while off-peak periods allowed for more lenient treatment and extended recovery times. This adaptive approach prevented mass disruptions to operations, while maintaining essential control over personnel management. The regulatory system also incorporated proactive measures to prevent pregnancy and manage reproductive health. Mandatory participation in monthly health screenings, documented in the Asakusa monitoring records, ensured early detection of potential issues. These examinations, conducted by licensed practitioners under official supervision, combined traditional diagnostic methods with emerging Western medical techniques, creating hybrid protocols that maximized effectiveness while respecting cultural sensitivities. The results informed administrative decisions about work assignments, client interactions, and preventive measures. Legal protection for medical practitioners operating within the pleasure quarters represented another crucial aspect of institutional response. The Shinbashi Medical Charter granted practicing physicians special status and limited immunity from prosecution, encouraging them to document and report pregnancy cases accurately while developing innovative treatment approaches. This protection extended to herbal specialists, spiritual practitioners, and midwives working within approved frameworks, creating a network of officially sanctioned healthcare providers who could address reproductive concerns systematically while maintaining institutional oversight. Documentation and record-keeping requirements formed the backbone of regulatory effectiveness, with multiple layers of verification ensuring accuracy and accountability. The Hakusan archival system maintained duplicate records of all pregnancy-related cases, storing them in secure facilities accessible only to authorized personnel. These archives included detailed case studies, treatment protocols, outcome analyses, and statistical reports that informed policy development and procedural refinement. Regular audits and cross-referencing maintained data integrity while providing valuable insights into trends and patterns requiring institutional attention. The legal framework's evolution reflected growing recognition of psychological and social factors influencing pregnancy management. Later amendments to the Nanushi Rei incorporated provisions for mental health support, stress management programs, and peer counseling initiatives. These additions acknowledged the complex interplay between emotional well-being and reproductive health, marking a significant shift toward more holistic approaches to regulation and administration within the pleasure quarters. Enforcement mechanisms combined traditional authority with modern organizational principles, creating efficient systems for implementing and monitoring compliance. Specialized inspection teams, known as the Maijiro patrols, conducted regular audits of houses and clinics, verifying adherence to established protocols while identifying areas requiring intervention or improvement. Their reports fed into centralized decision-making processes that coordinated responses across multiple administrative levels, ensuring consistent application of policies while allowing for localized adaptations based on specific circumstances. This sophisticated regulatory apparatus, while appearing rigid and controlling from the outside, actually facilitated remarkable flexibility in managing pregnancy challenges within the pleasure quarters. By establishing clear guidelines, defining roles and responsibilities, and creating structured pathways for addressing various scenarios, the system enabled administrators, medical practitioners, and courtesans themselves to navigate complex situations with relative predictability and security. The careful balance between strict regulation and pragmatic adaptation exemplifies the Tokugawa government's mastery of social control through institutional design, creating a framework that endured for centuries while accommodating the evolving needs of one of society's most controversial yet economically vital institutions. The financial ramifications of pregnancy within the pleasure quarters extended far beyond immediate medical costs, creating complex economic ripples that affected every level of the institution's operation. Detailed accounting records maintained by pleasure quarter administrators reveal a sophisticated understanding of these financial dynamics, with entries spanning multiple ledgers and covering diverse expense categories that collectively painted a comprehensive picture of pregnancy's economic impact. The monetization of reproductive health management emerged as a crucial component of the pleasure quarters business model, transforming what might have been purely personal concerns into carefully calculated financial transactions. Primary among these expenses stood the direct costs of medical intervention, which varied dramatically depending on the chosen method and the patient's social standing. Surgical procedures performed by senior physicians commanded premium fees, often exceeding several months' worth of a courtesan's earnings. These charges included not only the surgeon's expertise, but also facility usage, specialized equipment maintenance, and post-operative care packages that could extend for weeks or months. Herbal treatments, while initially appearing less expensive, accumulated significant costs through repeated applications and the premium prices charged for rare ingredients sourced from distant regions. Spiritual interventions added another layer of expense, with offerings, talismans, and ceremonial fees contributing to substantial sums that courtesans or their houses had to cover. The opportunity cost of lost productivity during recovery periods represented perhaps the most significant financial burden. High-ranking courtesans, whose absence could disrupt established client relationships and reduce house revenues substantially, often faced mounting debts to cover their contractual obligations during forced leave. These debts accumulated through multiple channels. Missed client appointments generated penalty fees, canceled performances resulted in lost ticket sales, and interrupted training sessions for junior courtesans created gaps in succession planning that required expensive remediation. Administrators maintained detailed profit and loss projections for each courtesan, calculating the optimal balance between necessary recovery time and financial sustainability. Insurance-like arrangements emerged to manage these financial risks, though they operated differently from modern insurance systems. Courtesans paid regular contributions to communal funds managed by house mothers or senior administrators, creating pools of capital that could be drawn upon in times of need. These contributions, while providing some financial security, effectively functioned as additional taxes on courtesans' earnings, further increasing their financial burdens. The terms of access to these funds varied according to rank and seniority, with newer arrivals facing more stringent requirements and higher interest rates on borrowed amounts. Client relationships introduced additional financial complexities, particularly in cases where paternity questions arose. Settlement negotiations often involved substantial payments from clients to compensate for lost earning potential, medical expenses, and reputation management costs. These settlements, documented in special ledgers known as the Cagnacho, Gold Knight books, sometimes reached astronomical sums that could make or break a house's annual profitability. The negotiation process itself generated additional expenses, including legal fees, mediation costs, and sometimes even bribes to ensure discreet resolution of sensitive matters. Reproductive health management evolved into a specialized sector of the pleasure quarter economy, generating significant revenue streams through various channels. Pharmaceutical houses supplying herbal remedies, surgical clinics offering advanced procedures, and spiritual practitioners providing protective charms all thrived within this ecosystem. Some establishments developed subscription models for preventive care, charging regular fees for access to priority medical services, exclusive herbal preparations, and personalized spiritual guidance. These recurring revenues helped stabilize pleasure quarter finances, while creating additional financial obligations for courtesans trying to maintain their careers. The economic impact extended beyond individual courtesans to affect entire houses and districts. Houses with high incidences of pregnancy cases faced increased operational costs, reduced client satisfaction scores, and potential penalties from district administrators concerned about maintaining quality standards. Successful management of these challenges became a competitive advantage, with some houses developing reputations for superior reproductive health management that attracted higher-paying clients willing to pay premiums for perceived safety. This market differentiation created economic incentives for innovation in treatment methods and prevention strategies. Labor economics within the pleasure quarters adjusted to accommodate these financial realities. Wage structures incorporated risk premiums that compensated courtesans for undertaking physically demanding work with inherent reproductive risks. Performance bonuses and retention incentives evolved to encourage longer-term employment relationships that spread financial risks more evenly over time. Some houses experimented with profit-sharing arrangements that aligned courtesans' interests more closely with institutional goals. Though these innovations often faced resistance from traditionalists concerned about undermining established hierarchies, the emergence of specialized financial instruments reflected growing sophistication in managing pregnancy-related financial risks. Deferred payment plans, installment agreements, and secured loans became common tools for spreading costs over longer periods, though they often trapped courtesans in cycles of debt that proved difficult to escape. Collateral arrangements sometimes involved relinquishing future earnings or accepting reduced status within the hierarchy, creating complex trade-offs between short-term financial relief and long-term career prospects. Administrative costs associated with managing these financial implications represented another significant burden. Maintaining accurate records, processing claims, negotiating settlements, and coordinating various stakeholders required substantial investments in administrative infrastructure. Specialized legal advisors, and financial managers became permanent fixtures within pleasure quarter operations, their salaries adding to overall operational expenses while theoretically improving financial management efficiency through professional expertise. Market forces influenced the evolution of pricing structures for reproductive health services, with supply and demand dynamics affecting everything from basic herbal treatments to advanced surgical procedures. Seasonal variations in client traffic patterns impacted the availability and cost of medical services, while competition between different pleasure quarter establishments drove innovation in service delivery and pricing models. Some districts experimented with package deals that bundled preventive care with unused emergency services and recovery support into comprehensive reproductive health management programs, creating new revenue streams while attempting to stabilize financial risks. The cumulative effect of these financial factors created a complex economic ecosystem that both constrained and empowered courtesans within the pleasure quarters. While the system imposed significant financial burdens and created potential for exploitation, it also generated opportunities for strategic financial management and career advancement for those who mastered its intricacies. The monetization of reproductive health management thus represented both a source of oppression and a pathway to agency within the pleasure quarter's economic structure, reflecting the fundamental tension between institutional control and individual autonomy that characterized this unique social institution. The intricate web of practices surrounding pregnancy management in Japan's historical pleasure quarters continues to cast long shadows over contemporary discussions of reproductive rights and women's health. Modern scholarship has increasingly recognized these historical methods not merely as artifacts of a bygone era, but as sophisticated responses to systemic challenges that resonate with current debates about bodily autonomy, medical ethics, and institutional power. The legacy of these practices manifests in surprising ways across Japanese culture, medicine, and social policy, offering valuable insights while raising complex ethical questions about the intersection of tradition and progress. Contemporary Japanese obstetrics and gynecology departments, particularly those specializing in reproductive health, maintain extensive archives documenting traditional practices and their evolution into modern medical protocols. Many hospitals in former pleasure quarter districts continue to offer specialized services that incorporate elements of traditional herbal medicine and acupuncture, alongside conventional treatments, creating hybrid approaches that acknowledge historical roots while embracing scientific advancement. This integration extends beyond mere cultural preservation. As researchers actively study the efficacy of traditional methods and their potential applications in modern healthcare contexts, the persistence of certain diagnostic techniques and treatment philosophies speaks to the enduring influence of historical practices on current medical thought. Social attitudes toward reproductive health in Japan bear distinct imprints of these historical experiences. The emphasis on discretion, respect for patient autonomy, and holistic approaches to women's health reflects long-standing cultural values that originated in the pleasure quarter's unique circumstances. Modern support networks for women facing unplanned pregnancies often draw inspiration from the sisterhoods and mutual aid systems developed by historical courtesans, adapting these traditional structures to contemporary needs while preserving their essential spirit of solidarity and shared experience. The sophisticated understanding of psychological impacts and long-term consequences evident in current counseling practices owes much to centuries of accumulated wisdom about managing reproductive health within constrained environments. Legal frameworks governing reproductive rights in Japan show remarkable parallels to historical regulatory systems, particularly in their emphasis on balancing individual choice with social responsibility. Current legislation regarding abortion, contraception, and reproductive health services incorporates nuanced understandings of privacy, consent, and institutional oversight that echo traditional approaches to managing sensitive medical information. The careful calibration of rights and responsibilities reflects historical precedents while addressing modern ethical concerns, demonstrating how past experiences continue to inform present policymaking. Cultural representations of reproductive health in contemporary Japanese media often reference historical practices, sometimes explicitly and sometimes through subtle allusions that require cultural literacy to fully appreciate. Popular manga series, television dramas, and films tackling reproductive health themes frequently incorporate visual metaphors and narrative devices that trace directly back to ukiyo-e conventions and kabuki traditions. These artistic connections serve both creative and educational purposes, maintaining cultural continuity while facilitating discussions about sensitive topics through familiar frameworks. The persistence of certain symbols and storytelling techniques demonstrates how historical methods of encoding complex information continue to shape contemporary communication about reproductive health matters. Medical education in Japan places significant emphasis on understanding historical context when studying reproductive health, recognizing that many current practices evolved from traditional methods developed under specific social conditions. Training programs for obstetricians and gynecologists include modules on historical approaches to pregnancy management, encouraging students to analyze the rationale behind different practices and consider their relevance to modern challenges. This historical perspective informs clinical decision-making and helps practitioners develop more culturally sensitive approaches to patient care. particularly when dealing with older generations who may still hold traditional views about reproductive health management. Public health initiatives targeting reproductive health awareness and education often incorporate elements of traditional knowledge while emphasizing scientific accuracy and evidence-based practices. Campaigns addressing menstrual health, fertility awareness, and pregnancy prevention blend modern medical information with cultural references that increase accessibility and acceptance among diverse populations. The success of these hybrid approaches demonstrates how historical practices can be respectfully adapted to contemporary needs, creating more effective public health interventions that honor cultural heritage while promoting progressive change. Ethical debates surrounding reproductive rights in Japan continue to grapple with questions first raised in historical contexts, though framed according to modern sensibilities and scientific understanding. Discussions about bodily autonomy, institutional power, and medical ethics often reference historical precedents while considering current technological capabilities and social norms. The sophisticated balance between individual rights and collective responsibility evident in historical practices provides valuable perspective for navigating these complex issues in ways that respect cultural heritage while embracing progressive values. The institutional memory of Japan's historical approaches to reproductive health management influences current healthcare delivery systems, particularly in urban areas where traditional pleasure quarters once flourished. Many modern clinics and hospitals maintain historical archives and host educational programs that preserve this knowledge while facilitating its integration into contemporary practice. The architecture of some medical facilities even incorporates design elements reminiscent of traditional healing spaces, creating environments that acknowledge historical roots while meeting modern healthcare standards. As Japan continues to evolve its approach to reproductive health and women's rights, the legacy of historical practices serves as both foundation and cautionary tale. The remarkable sophistication of traditional methods, developed under extreme constraints, inspires contemporary innovations while highlighting the importance of respecting patient autonomy and cultural sensitivity. At the same time, the human costs documented in historical records remind modern practitioners of the ethical responsibilities inherent in managing reproductive health care. This complex inheritance shapes current discussions and future directions, ensuring that the lessons of the past continue to inform progress toward more equitable and compassionate approaches to women's healthcare in Japanese society.